Hey everybody, Alex from AdaptableStrength.com here to talk to you about hamstring training. Hamstrings are one of the more neglected muscles in the body, and you can see it in sports. Whenever an athlete just goes ahead and just tears a hamstring, there is a good probability that one of the causes for that is it being too small in comparison to the quads, it being too weak in comparison to the quads, or just not being flexible enough to handle the load that they're being put under. So we're going to go ahead and talk about hamstring training in depth today with the goal of getting them as big as possible. All right, so we'll start ourselves off here by talking about the training variables that are going to need to be controlled in order to maximize the efficiency of your hamstring training. So the first thing you want to look at is just simply how often you train your hamstrings. That training frequency is going to be a really important factor in terms of getting them to be as strong and big as possible. You want to make sure you're choosing the correct exercises for those times that you do train them, and then you can manipulate various things within the workout itself, like the rep ranges, the effort levels that you are putting in, what kind of intensity techniques you're going to be using, and you got to put that all together. However, one of the biggest things to really take notice of when you are training your hamstrings are the joint angle changes that take place. You have both your knees and your hips where they're going to have the hamstrings connect to, and you're going to need to manipulate in order to really make sure that everything happens as effectively as possible. So, what that means is you can take a look at whether the movement you are doing is going to predominantly bend through your knee or bend through your hips. Maybe it's a combination of both. However, if it's both, then odds are the hamstrings aren't actually doing too much in the motion. So we can use an example for that would be the squat. If you squat, you bend at both the knees and your hips. And what that means is the stretch and the demand of the hamstrings does not really change too much throughout the entirety of the motion. However, if you take a look at a stiff-legged deadlift or Romanian deadlift, which are exactly the same thing, they just have interchangeable names, you're going to take a look at the fact that the hip is really where the bend happens. The knee stays at the same angle the entire time. And when you have that stretch occurring through that hip area of the hamstring, it's going to stress the hamstring in a different way than doing something along the lines of a seated leg curl. A seated leg curl, you're having a standard angle happening at the hip, but more change happening at the knee. It's going to result in a different stress surge for the hamstring, and they are both very good strategies to utilize. You just need to make sure that you're hitting all angles as effectively as possible. And the way to do that is to really take a look at the exercise selection that you're able to utilize. And you'll notice the way that I've differentiated these is a little beyond just compound and isolation. It's predominantly squeeze emphasis and stretch emphasis. There's some correlation between compound and isolation when you look at these two variables, but it's not absolute. Because as you can see, the seated leg curl, that's going to be an isolation exercise, but it's alongside the stiff-legged deadlifts and your good mornings, which are both compound. So it's not perfect. The squeeze emphasis are going to be generally your isolation exercises. One of the ones that's most underutilized, and unfortunately a lot of times that's because of the equipment, is going to be the glute ham raise. It is one of my absolute favorites for building a functional hamstring as well as a functional just glute as well. You're going to be stressing your hamstrings and your glutes in a way that isn't generally done. It's very hard to load the hamstrings in that kind of a way, and if you can, it's a fantastic strategy to use, but it's also not vital to getting the best hamstrings possible. It's just a tool, just like any other exercise, but it's definitely one I recommend if you have the equipment available to give the glute ham raises a try. Now, you have the standard ones as well. Most gyms are going to be equipped with a lying leg curl and or a seated leg curl. And those two are going to be, again, really solid staples. They've been used for decades and decades and decades. They're going to be great ways to either begin your hamstring training or, preferably on the seated leg curl side of things, be the entirety of your hamstring training for the day. They're solid isolation exercises, and you know that your hamstrings are going to be the limiting factor when you perform those, which are not always the case if you don't have the skill required to perform hyperextensions in a way that it puts the biggest demand on the hamstrings, or your stiff-legged deadlifts. Sometimes people get more lower back or glute depending on how they execute the exercise. So here we're going to look at the exercise order. Here you have workout 1, that's going to be lying leg curls followed by stiff-legged deadlifts. This is a much more overall approach to hamstring training, but it's not the only approach. One of the simplest things to do is just simply do a leg curl for as much as you can alone, and that can definitely be enough, but I believe to really get the well-rounded hamstring capability as well as size, you want to make sure you're hitting them from both of those main angles, one being from the knee, one being from your hips. The stiff-legged deadlift is going to qualify with the hips. The lying leg curl and the seated leg curl are both going to qualify for being at your knees. The workout 2 here, even though it's only one exercise in a seated leg curl, you have to keep in mind this is most likely going to be paired with quad training as well. And if your quad training is going to be high on the squats or doing at the very least exercises that are going to involve more lower back, you might even be looking at putting these leg curls after a workout involving deadlifts. You don't want to have too many exercises that are going to put a lot of demand on your lower back. So what you can do is just hammer out seated leg curls to the extreme, and that'll definitely be enough as long as you are at other points in time hitting the hamstrings from that hip angle, which is where workout 1 is going to come into play. I really like to pair your stiff-legged deadlifts with a leg curl before it to prime the hamstrings. It's got a little bit to do with pre-exhausting, but mostly it has to do with warming up your hamstring enough so that when you put it into that extreme stretch position, it's going to be easier to feel. And I believe there is a safety value to this as well. You do not want to overly tax your muscles too soon or in ways that they're not quite ready for. You want to make sure that you are warmed up enough and ready enough that the limiting factor is what you want. And by putting your leg curls before your stiff-legged deadlifts, you're increasing the likelihood that your hamstrings will be taking the brunt of that motion. So this is going to be in conjunction with other leg training as well. So workout 1, your quad training is most likely going to be things where you have either back support or your back's at least not taking too much of the brunt of the motion. So belt squats are going to be great for that, hack squats, pendulum squats, fantastic to pair with workout 1. Workout 2, you might be having traditional low bar squats. You might be doing it as part of a posterior chain day where you have deadlifts and everything taking part in it. So because of that, you want to make sure you have all of the volume equated throughout for all of the muscle groups, not just your hamstrings. Because remember, this is a snapshot. This is not the entirety of your workout program. It's only a small part of it. But no matter which style you do, you want to make sure that your total working sets is going to be around similar numbers. So you're looking at 3 to 5 maybe in total. So you might do 4 working sets for the seated leg curls, and then maybe 2 with the lying leg curls and workout 1, followed by 2 or 3 with the stiff-legged deadlifts. And that should give you a pretty solid overall hamstring workout, assuming this is being done once a week for each of these workouts. Now, that leads into the question of what your weekly volume is going to be. Because when you're trying to handle the volume for your workouts, you want to make sure you're maximizing either the muscles you are prioritizing or everything around as a whole. And if you are doing this as a hamstring specialization style of program, you're going to want to maybe increase that weekly volume through either the workout volume or increasing the frequency in terms of how many times you are doing hamstring workouts. So 2 or 3 workouts is most likely going to be all your hamstrings are going to be able to recover from during the week, because that's going to be what's going to determine what you can do, the amount that you can recover. If you can recover enough to do 3 workouts in the week, then phenomenal. Make sure they're effective and you're solid. But if you're really hitting them hard and maybe going heavy on the stiff-legged deadlifts or the good morning side of things, having 2 workouts per week may be a good idea just to ensure that you have safety in terms of supporting musculature as well. It's all up to you. It's dependent upon your goals and what your body is prepared to deal with. Now, when you are training, we looked at before your exercise selection in terms of squeeze versus stretch emphasis. But in terms of rep ranges, compound isolation, they come into more relevancy here. And so for the compound ones, I would definitely err on the side of going on lower reps in comparison to the isolation exercises that you can go higher rep on. So when we're looking at the exercises here, you have the isolation, the leg curls and the glute ham raise. They're going to be a little bit higher in terms of the reps. For the compound ones, you might want to go ahead and have higher lower reps there for higher intensities. Now, the ham dominant hyperextensions, that's kind of an odd one to put in as compound because if you look at it at a glance, it seems more isolation. You're just bending at the waist. But at least the way that I prefer to do it, there's simultaneous bend at the knees and at the hips. So it turns into both joints moving. But the knees do move a lot less than the hips do. So you can play around with your execution depending on the way your body is. You might be able to do it more as a true isolation, but here I'm making sure that it's allowed to have a little bit of knee movement along with the hips if that's what your body requires. So to be inclusive, I have it listed here under the compound exercises. Now, the thing is, you can technically go all the way up to 30 reps. There's nothing wrong with that. However, you have to also keep in mind your concentration. The odds of you having a true concentration for every single rep that you do up to 30 on a stiff-legged deadlift is very, very low, especially if your rep cadence is slow, which is why I would say on the stiff-legged deadlifts, the good mornings, I'm more tempted to put the recommendations on the reps there like 6 to 10. It goes up to 15 mostly because the hyperextensions are included in there, and the hyperextensions, they could even go beyond that. But if you want to go ahead and simplify this into staying the same with stretch emphasis and squeeze emphasis, then we can follow a similar logic to it where the stretch emphasis exercises might require more concentration, therefore they get the lower rep range compared to the squeeze emphasis. The squeeze emphasis, they are going to be exercises where you're most likely going to have more external support in them, in which case feel free to up the rep ranges. So here you can see those ham dominant hyperextensions are going to be on the higher rep range in comparison to the stretch emphasis ones, which are going to be more of the compound side of things, traditionally speaking. But when you're looking at all of these, and we're talking about rep ranges, you need to also think about the amount of effort that goes into executing these exercises in whatever rep ranges you decide to do. The thing is, you have to look at your effort overall, because if you're not doing enough effort, you're not going to grow as much as you otherwise would have. So one of the tools we need to do is to figure out how to quantify that effort. And I have an entire video on this. It's like 25 minutes long, going very in-depth into analyzing whether you actually train hard. And it's an in-depth explanation on RPE, on effort, and how to make sure you are gauging your own effort as accurately as possible. So if you want the really big explanation of this, highly recommend that video. However, here's your synopsis. I prefer to quantify my effort in terms of RPE because it adds a little bit more nuance compared to RIR. RPE is going to allow you to put in those halves versus RIR, which is straight, whether you can do one more rep, zero more reps, zero more rep, whichever way the correct English language is. You're going to have that flat number element to it. For the halves, you get to have more nuance and more feeling into it, where it's like you're open to the possibility that maybe if you truly tapped into another level, you'd be able to do more. And for that reason, I prefer RPE. Now, you can quantify it, but there are ways to change the effort. And it mostly goes into what you can look at in the during a set versus what you can look at in terms of organization of the sets. So your direct effort changes are within the set itself. It's decreasing your proximity to failure and adding intensity techniques. That increases the amount of effort within the individual set. But if you want to program more effort, then you add sets, you add reps, you add weight, you add training frequency. Those variables are what's going to increase your effort on the whole as opposed to on the individual set. Now, what this is really getting at is the fact that you have to progress. You are looking at your beginning of your training cycle to be a little bit easier than the really extreme end, which is at the very end of that training cycle. You want to make sure that the weekly progression has your intensity going from lower intensity to higher intensity. This is going to give your muscles reason to grow, because you have to remember your body does not want to build muscle. It is an expensive process and it's an expensive tissue to maintain that should be optional to have. So you have to really, really ramp up your body's feel for the need to have that muscle as a method of survival. So you have to train hard. You have to give it reason to continue to grow. And that's where the progression of your training is really going to shine. Now, there are tools to increase that intensity. Intensity techniques is probably the quickest way to increase your intensity because it's immediate. You're going to be short on time. Okay, well then throw in some negatives, some drop sets or something along those lines to create a more time efficient but very, very intense workout. It's going to allow you to train beyond failure, beyond RPE 10. Because let's just take, for example, here the drop sets. If you go to failure on a weight and then you immediately drop the weight and go to failure again, you're by definition doing more work than you initially did, and you had already stopped at failure the first round, and you do more the second round. You're increasing layers of failure onto it that are going to tax the muscle to a much greater extreme than just stopping at the first level of failure. And if you want more details of these, again, go into that do you really train hard video, because that's going to talk a lot more and show examples of these intensity techniques. But for now, just know that they're a possibility for your training. Now, the next step is to put this all into an entire program where you compound your knowledge of just what the exercise is with how many reps do you do for them, for how many sets, and then go further by putting in that weekly progression for what you should be programming. So here you have an acknowledgement in terms of all the different ways to increase that intensity over time. You have week 1 with lighter intensities compared to week 8. Now, there are 2 separate rep ranges here, one for the compound motions, one for the isolation motions, so that you can, sorry, not rep ranges, but intensity levels, your RPEs for your compounds versus isolations. And you can build that over time, again, to show that progression. You'll notice there are intensity techniques added in at the end for the last 3 weeks, but only 1 week of it is going to be on the compounds, because you have to be very selective about doing intensity techniques for compound motions. The thing is that I have that there to be more inclusive, but stiff-legged deadlifts, I don't recommend using intensity techniques on because they're so form intensive and demanding. So even though it's on there, that's going to be more for if you're throwing in like the ham dominant hyperextensions or something in there, something where you have a little bit more support in the system to do those safely. All right, but that's your overview of your training, and I appreciate you guys watching. If you guys need anything more, I've got more information on adaptablestrength.com. You can go ahead and check out some short form information, Instagram at Adaptable Strength. And if you really just want to skip everything and just email me directly, I'll be happy to reach out as soon as I can. It's Alex at adaptablestrength.com. For now, just thanks everybody. Hope that helped out, and just a friendly reminder that you're not doing this alone.